All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Rahul Thakur, and I lead Qyrus's enterprise sales team globally. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Ameet Deshpande, who heads the Qyrus's platform engineering. This is the first in a series of webinars that we will conduct over the next few months. Today's webinar will focus on API testing. And we chose this topic because in today's hyper-connected world, APIs dominate the technology landscape and play a critical role in delivering information and services to everyone. And yet, in many of our conversations with clients and prospects, we learned that API testing is the weakest link in their QA process. And let me qualify that further. Comprehensive API testing is the weakest link in their process. And while that is a subjective statement, we conducted a survey with the QA organizations that we work with to help us understand the pain points and challenges at a more granular level. We assessed the state of their API testing with a set of questions like, how much API testing do your organizations do? How much is carried out by QA teams versus development? How many test APIs as a part of their pipeline? How much API process testing is done? And questions like that. And some of the key findings were 47% of respondents agreed that they don't test APIs adequately. And 78% of those respondents said that API testing is complex. 65% of respondents said that their API testing was manual, and 23% said it was semi-automated. So a large number of people responded that they don't have full automation. Less than 10% of the respondents said they don't conduct comprehensive API testing. And over 90% of those said that's because API documentation, access, and knowledge is challenging to procure. 80% plus people said that an integrated platform will help them do more comprehensive API testing. 72% of respondents replied that their API landscape is only going to get larger and complicated, and 88% agreed that cost is going to be a major factor. In fact, on a broader survey level, total cost of ownership was the #1 issue highlighted by leaders. And as we reviewed the results, we distilled them down to 3 issues that we'll focus on in this webinar and demonstrate to you how Qyrus can help. #1 is tackling API testing complexity. #2 is breaking down the barriers or silos and make API testing more comprehensive. And the third one, which is very critical, is how do you scale your API testing beyond functional validations to get more coverage, but in a cost-effective manner. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Ameet Deshpande, who has over 25 years of experience in testing across industries and has led the development of Qyrus from the beginning and is very familiar with the nuts and bolts of the platform. Ameet has been a technical speaker at many conferences and continues to be a leading voice in the testing community. So with that, Ameet, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rahul. So Rahul has set it up pretty well. So it's needless to say that API testing is something that is important. And yet we see a lot of teams find it extremely hard to start, maintain, and scale API testing. So in his address, so basically he highlighted 3 primary problem statements. And if you condense it down to the bare bones of it. So basically there are 3 main issues that we see. One is the API testing is complex. Second one is testing is primarily done in silos. And third is it has to scale and scale in a very cost-effective manner. So let's try and address these 3 issues and see how Qyrus as a platform solves this problem. And so the way I'm going to structure the demonstration of how we solve these problems into 2 parts. The first part being I'll just walk you through a few screens along with of Qyrus, along with some of the capabilities which help us address these problems. And then once we go through all these three main areas, we are going to then go to the platform and see it all live, right? So that's how we're going to. So let's kick it off by API testing being complex. So some of the things that we have seen people trying to do with API testing is use some standard products, both open source as well as enterprise. And one of the common themes that we have seen happening is that a lot of these API testing solutions expect the testers to write a lot of code in order to bring the API on board, pass data to them and execute or do the assertions. So each of these aspects actually require a lot of code. Plus, you would also need an execution engine, which actually is going to make an API call like a standard HTTP client. Now, what we bring from Qyrus perspective, the first step to simplification is that we have a very intuitive UI-based approach to API testing. So as you can see on the screens, we support multiple types of testing, and everything that you do on Qyrus as far as API testing is concerned is absolutely codeless. So there, the simplification starts from that point itself. And as you can see, we support multiple things, and we'll go into each of these when we see the platform. And there are multiple ways in which you can import, right? So you can get your Postman collection, which is, as we all know, a lot of developers use Postman. So if you are from testing team, if you would like to fetch the same API metadata from your developers, you can always do that. And you have ability to upload, if you run on or use OpenAPI spec for your API documentation, then you can use that. Things like Swagger and others are supported. Plus, if you have any other standalone documentation for your API, which basically might be a simple text file which contains details about your API, like endpoint and context path and so on, you could always do that as well. And then, all of this at the end of the day, we are doing all this for testing. So you can basically create test suites out of it, which is again UI based. And as you can see on the right hand side, there are all the different APIs. And then on the left hand side, you have a collection of these, which we call as test suites, right? So the onboarding, testing of multiple APIs, multiple kinds of tests on these APIs, and then housekeeping in terms of putting them into suites and running them, etc., are extremely simple as far as Qyrus is concerned. Now, then comes the part where we spoke about, so everything, so there are two parts to doing API testing. So one is setting up your tests, which basically involves passing data, which basically involve getting the metadata of your API. So all those aspects are something that you can get using your API documentation. And then the assertions itself, where pretty much all the solutions that we see in the market expect you to write a lot of JavaScript and other code, depending on what kind of APIs you're testing and what kind of tools you use. So we rely on completely codeless assertions. And then that doesn't mean that our assertions are superficial just because they are codeless. It also, as you can see, there are multiple kinds of assertions that you can do, which basically points to, which leads to a very high coverage. And we'll see some of those examples when we go through the platform. Now, so bringing APIs on board, setting them up, passing data to them, organizing your tests into suites, executing them, finding assertions or writing assertions without any code. So the primary complexity of getting everything onto Qyrus in a codeless fashion is something that helps address the complexity problem. Now, then comes the aspect about testing being done in silos. Very rarely it happens that, today we see a lot of organizations transitioning themselves into more microservices based architectures, or if not, then API forms the foundational aspects of a lot of systems, irrespective of what industry they belong to. So it's very rare that one team deals with all the APIs, and your API testing is only complete when you look at it from an end-to-end perspective. So we see a lot of cases where people have single providers, multiple consumers, and so on. So what it essentially means is that API testing done in silo only goes so far in achieving coverage. So you have to test your APIs in conjunction with other APIs and other services that might be running as part of your organization. So as part of this, basically we cannot afford to run API testing in silo. So for that, we created a feature in Qyrus called API process. Now, what this essentially means is you can basically turn your existing functional tests that you write on your APIs on Qyrus into end-to-end tests by connecting your APIs to other APIs which might be part of your platform, right? So as you can see, we can fetch all your APIs from your functional test onto what we call as process tests in a single click, and we'll go through this as well. And then what also helps is the drag and drop interface that we have in order to connect other APIs to the main API under test, or the entire process under test. And this also leads to another interesting use case that we have seen our clients doing. Is sometimes it's extremely hard for testing teams or teams which are not involved technically in building of these systems to sort of understand how their business processes actually work, right? So when let's say if I am doing an e-commerce shop, or if I'm building an e-commerce shop, then if I'm responsible for payments, I would also be interested in understanding how a product gets ordered, right? So there are and these might be APIs and services which are built from another team, right? But testing team needs to have a holistic view of how the entire system is running, so that they can perform better end-to-end testing. And again, the intent is to achieve higher coverage, right? So that is how we avoid testing in silos, by helping people connect with a very easy intuitive drag and drop interface to build these end-to-end API-based tests. Now, when you look at, even when you run these tests, which are end-to-end, the way the tests are reported or the results are reported also is something that is extremely intuitive for you to understand how the communication, or how are these different services talking to each other. Now, and if you see, and it sort of gives you an overall report, right? So it's not just about the single APIs of whether they are passing or failing, but it's also about how these APIs in turn perform as part of an end-to-end integrated process. Now, what this also does is helps you understand or centralize problems in case a process or an end-to-end test detects something, right? And needless to say, when we build tests like this in an end-to-end fashion, then you're also passing data between these, like exactly like the way these APIs talk in production with each other, right? So you get this holistic report. And then what also happens is when in case of a failure of the process, you can precisely point out which of the API did not perform as per the expectation, which led to failure of this end-to-end process. And keep in mind that these APIs which are part of this process may or may not belong to your team, or they may not even sometimes belong to your organization. So you should be able to easily centralize the problem in case an end-to-end test fails, and that's where the assertions come into picture. And one a very interesting aspect of building API tests on Qyrus, and especially turning them into an end-to-end test, is that when you bring your single individual API functional tests into an end-to-end test, they also carry forward all the assertions that you had written for those single APIs. And as you can see, as I said, when something fails, you precisely know which of the APIs was responsible for this failure by going back and looking at assertions, in each of these APIs. And plus, you also see the non-functional results, like response times of these APIs, and if at all slow response was a reason for failure, and so on, right? And then, as I said, so the assertions are also getting carried forward from your functional test, right? So this helps you test, your API in conjunction with the rest of the APIs in precisely the same way that your APIs would actually behave or operate in production instance. So now comes the point where you have to scale it, right? So when we talk about scaling, while these APIs might work, in a from an individual test perspective, but how do they behave in a high user load environment? So essentially, what we're seeing is stress testing of these APIs, right? So turn these functional tests into performance tests. So which is one of the very important features of Qyrus, because we are a SaaS-based platform hosted on cloud. We have an ability to scale both vertically as well as horizontally in order to generate load and test these APIs more from a performance standpoint as well. So as you can see, again, the beauty of being on a single platform like Qyrus is that you can pass all the assets, whether they are tests or test data, from one place to another place, from one project to another project, or one team to another team, and so on. So here you can see, again, I have taken the functional tests that we have written and converted them into performance tests. And as you can see, so when I run them into performance tests, it's as the scaling of this test is as simple as using this slider that you see on the screen to just increase the load, and then give a response time or a threshold response time that you're looking at that for that load, and check whether your APIs are performant to your expectations, right? And then even the results, as you can see, one is, as you can see on the top, there is a response time trend, but we see a lot of our clients using Qyrus services to stress test their APIs to see at what point do they fail. So in such cases, there's also an option where you can see every call that is made as part of the performance test has a corresponding status code check, so that you know precisely at what point your API started failing, right? So you should see more 500s or 5XX series as your load increases. And then there are some advanced metrics as well that will let you understand what is the throughput latency. So basically, this is from a load generation standpoint. But there's just one caveat that I would like to mention here, is that this performance test is a non-invasive performance test, right? So we do not expect people to do any sort of configurations or instrumentation or anything on the server side of the API that they're testing. So essentially, these tests that we just spoke about, like in terms of performance, are purely from a client side perspective. So we're trying to understand what do your clients experience when they hit your APIs and at a particular load, right? So that's precisely what we're checking. So it's not server side performance test. We are not intending to give you bottlenecks and the areas that need to be fixed and so on, but it'll give you enough data from a client side perspective. So what is all this leading to is that you see we are able to convert functional tests into performance tests. So what that means is that I can run performance tests right next to my functional test. So, and we all know functional testing happens typically earlier in the life cycle. So which means that we are not only getting the functional results now with these features, we're also getting performance results. So which essentially is a shift left performance testing that you're getting as part of this. So now, so let's quickly move to the platform and then take a look at all this in action. So as you can see, when we log in, as I said, we are a SaaS product. So you just have to log in into the URL. So there's no workspace and all that concept. So there's a lot to Qyrus, but as Rahul mentioned, we are primarily focusing on API testing for today. So I can go into API testing service. I can go to my project, and as you can see, here are all my APIs, right? So, and you can see we spoke about getting things from Postman collections, or I can also upload my Swagger file, or I could give my URL, and we support REST, SOAP, and Graph APIs. So it's not just REST, but it supports other legacy as well as legacy APIs like SOAP and also Graph APIs as well. And then I can get it from, I can also add it manually, right? So in the interest of time, as part of this webinar, so we have set up a group of APIs which are very easy to understand, which is like an e-commerce shop, where, as you can see, I have multiple get APIs here, some delete, some put, some posts, right? And as you can see here, I can go into this. So all these things, so the first three tabs that you see are purely the metadata of the API, right? So we know what kind of authorization is required, and then what headers and parameters do I pass, and so on. And this particular screen is basically, this is again metadata. So you give a name to this API, which is easy to understand, and then you give the context path and what protocol it uses and so on. Now, again, if you use something like an OpenAPI spec, then all this information is pre-populated so that you don't have to do it again. And the same applies to Postman collections as well. Right. So, and then the interesting part is assertion. So as you can see, we support assertions across headers, JSON path, and then assertions on the body. And then we also do schema validation, which is part of what we typically refer to as contract testing. So in this case, I'm doing a few assertions. Like, and again, we spoke about codeless assertion. So basically, all the things that typically are sent or as part of um, as part of the header are pre-populated here. So in this case, I'm looking for content type, and I'm looking at connection parameters. I'm looking at server, if that information is coming, and then content type as well. So I can also quickly add something like a status code. That's right. And then I can say I'm looking for a 200, right? And then there is JSON path assertions. So I can actually extract JSON path. So and we understand a lot of testers would not be familiar with extracting or writing JSON paths, so they can always use our extractor. You can paste in your body or sample body, and then we extract the JSON paths from it, and then you can just use it. And then the assertions also have a lot of things here. So as you can see, so there are some math operators. And then you can write regular expressions, and for more advanced users, you can also write JavaScript if you have some conditions that you can you want to check. Now you can also see that there's some assertions which can be optional. So basically, what happens when you select as optional is that the test will not be marked as failed in case the assertion is not met. So basically, it's a soft assertion as opposed to a hard assertion, right? And then we have things on body, and then we spoke about the schema validation, where we can check whether your response adheres to the schema that you pass as part of this. And again, if you do not have schema validations or schema for your APIs, you can always put your sample response that you might have from your documentation, and we will generate the schema for you, assuming that whatever you passed was the right one. So once you do all this, you can straight away save this and go ahead and run this API. And then again, anything that you do on Qyrus is CI compliant. So we have native plugins across all the popular DevOps platforms. Plus we have a couple of other ways, like you can use our CLI. You can use CLI commands as well to trigger tests on Qyrus. So there is CI is natively supported, and then that also means that we support having multiple environments that you would prefer to run your tests on, right? So in this case, I'll just run on global. So and then it goes ahead and runs the test. So in this case, so let me look at some of the existing, and then it's quite fast. I mean, basically it runs on the cloud from our side. So let's say, so let's take some examples here of what how a result would look like. So in this case, so let's go in here. And then when you look at the results, you can see that it's a very easy to understand result because it basically lists down the total number of tests that you had, and then how many passed, how many failed, how long did it take to run the test. And then each of these assertions, like what you can see, are printed. And if it matches, where expected is equal to actual, then it matches. And you can also see the response body if you want to dig further, right? And you can email this report, you can download this report for your local reference. We have integrations with Jira, and other in project management tools like that you can always write these results back, or if you want to raise a bug, you can always do that, and so on, right? So and again, in case of failures, what you can also look at is something like this, right? So we just ran an API, we had a few assertions, and then as you can see, the content type assertion failed because we just had application/JSON, but the actual header had something more than that. And in this case, we were expecting that this particular JSON path should have a value which is not equal to this, but we got it was same, so hence it failed, and so on, right? So now I can look at this. I mean, this is a test that we just ran, and you can look at the just to cross check. I mean, this is like evidence. You can look at why this failed. So it's a very easy to understand. You can do multiple assertions across different areas, and it's much easier to execute, right? So that's as far as your functional tests go. Now, what I can do is we spoke about doing end-to-end tests. Now I can take the same test and then I can go in here. And then as you can see, it's a simple 4-step process. It will list me down all the functional tests that I have, then that I can import. And then once I import it, if I would like to make some changes, if I'd like to make some changes, I could manage those changes, or change some, because this is all the APIs that we imported, they would have all the data for individual tests or single functional tests. But I would like to make some changes because now these APIs are going to run in conjunction. So in that case, if I would like to make some changes, I could do that. If not, what I can do is all the APIs that I've selected, I can basically stitch them together like this. Like, I can just drag and drop interface here. And then once I do this, once I stitch the connection, sorry, I'm just, okay. So once I, do this connection, I could essentially go ahead and, run this test. So I've created this connection here. I can just save this and then go ahead and run this particular connection. So now I have, and this is something that I missed explaining last time, that now obviously there is environment, but now you can also run a performance test on this process. Like we call this a process, like basically it's like an integration test with the rest of your other APIs. So I could basically run a function. I can choose to run a functional test or a performance test. So I could just go ahead and run this. But while we wait for that, we could directly go to some of the reports that we have. And then as you can see, so this is how it runs. I can get the assertions for each of this API. And then what I could also do is look at whether this entire process itself passed. So there were two tests in this, there were two APIs in this, and both passed, so hence the entire process passed as well, right? And then obviously there are things that I can map. I can connect from, so I can basically create data. So let's take, I can basically map the data between this. And again, we support one-to-one and one-to-many configuration. So if you run something like a single provider and multiple consumer sort of setup, then you could always do that. And then here you can see the way we connect is like the first connection is like I'm taking, like this is the API which is get a single product. Then I can take, I'm taking the JSON path called ID, and then I'm passing it as a query parameter with a key name called ID to the update a product API. Then from there, I'm fetching an ID and then again sending it to another delete API as a query parameter under the key name ID, right? So, and then you could also transform some data if you want to. So you could write, you could write some JavaScript if you would like to. So if you want to do some massaging on top of it, you could do that. And then the interesting part is it's not only about these homogeneous API connections. You can essentially connect a REST API to a SOAP API and vice versa, right? So you can form a hybrid chain. And where this becomes extremely important is, we have seen in some of our clients who are undergoing, some sort of transformation or application modernization. We see that these modernization programs or digital transformation programs do not happen, as a big bang. So there are parts of the system, of an end-to-end system, which actually get transformed over a period of time. So you start with one system at a time. So the one system might migrate from being a SOAP API to a REST API. Then there will be half of the system should still be in SOAP, half of the system should still be in REST. But from an end user perspective, you would still like the whole system to be working as cohesively as it was before you did this transformation, right? So hence it's important that we give this capability to our users who can actually run both your older APIs and your newer APIs in conjunction, but still ensure that the entire process works pretty smooth, right? So that's as far as the end-to-end testing is concerned. Now coming back to the performance testing aspect of it. Now again, I could simply import. As you can see, there is an import option here, so which will basically list down all the APIs that I have as part of my functional test, and then I can simply import them into this and then execute them, right? So in this case, let's say get all products. I can go ahead and run this, and this is what I was saying earlier, that I can just use this slider to increase the load, right? And then, I mean, this is a demo account, so it's capped at 1,000, but our users can buy as many concurrent load that they would like to generate. And then at this load, what is the response time and they're expecting, and what environment would I like to run this on, right? So I can go ahead and run this. And then while that runs, we can, like, I've just run some 200 load API just some time back. Actually, I can look at the report and then look at the response time versus how did it fare. And as I said, like every thread also fetches the status code for you. And so that you can see if there is any, as the things go higher, as the response time goes higher, you can already see that sometimes your API start failing. And again, we are expecting this to primarily be run on QA environments. So hence, your APIs might fail at a lower load, right? So hence, we never. So even though, as you can see here, the threshold was at 1,000 milliseconds, but we see all these requests took more than 3 seconds to respond. But however, we don't mark these as passed or failed because we do not know what is the size of the environment that you're running on. So we leave it to you to decide, but we give you enough data for you to sort of understand what is the kind of performance that you're seeing, when you run your test in the QA environment right next to the functional test, right? So, and then as I said, so there are some advanced metrics as well. If you would like to sort of understand what were the hits per second, and again, this is more from a load generation standpoint. So what is TPS, and then the response time latencies over the time this particular test ran, right? And then this is something that, again, we have plugins for all this, so you could basically run this as part of your CI pipeline as well, right? And then as you can see, like the test that I just ran, it's sort of completed. So with 275 threads that we spoke about, and then you can see, pretty much there was no change in the status code. So now you might wonder that, you see, what is the point in running the same API, hitting the same API with the same data that you fetched from your functional test, right? So again, so that's why we have an ability to what we call as parameterization of these APIs. So ideally, the way we would like to run this is that every API, so every call that is made as part of the performance test should be having or carrying unique data for that particular call, right? So let's say you're testing a login API, and then when you hit the API with a certain user, then the next API comes in, and then it's going to fail, right? It's going to respond back with a 403 or whatever, depending on configuration, because the first API would have already used that data. So ideally, we would be passing data from an external file. So hence the parameterization is something that comes in handy. So the moment you toggle this on, right, so it'll help you fetch data from an external file, and then we drive the performance test by fetching data from the file and then executing your load test. Now, the similar thing is also available as part of our functional test as well. So here you can see the tests which are parameterized or data driven will have this Microsoft Excel or CSV kind of icon that you can go to, and then you can actually see what parts of the data are actually parameterized, right? So and when you open, right? And then since this is a post call, so you can see here that I could make this parameterized. And again, we have given features where, sometimes certain areas or certain parameters would always remain constant, but some might change. So you can pick and choose which aspect of your API, whether it is query parameter or a path parameter or a body. So you can basically highlight or only select those aspects which you would like to change. So it's not that everything needs to be passed from an external file, but you can always pick and choose which part of this API would you like to be parameterized. And in this case, we are essentially saying the body is something that is getting parameterized. And not only that, you also get to, because we know for the fact that when you parameterize the input data, then for every row of data that gets picked up and an API call is made, we know that there'll be a different responses for each of those calls that are made. So in a sense, what's going to happen is you cannot keep static assertions. You can also pass the assertions also as part of your parameterization file, right? So in this case, you're saying it's parameterized here. So which means that the assertion or the expected value is also passed from an external file. And again, that's something that is available as a template to you. So I can download this template. As you can see, I can just open it and then you can see it here that what am I giving as part of this. So this is my test case number, and this is the content type, which is the input, and then the request body is something. These are the two. So this is the assertion, as you can see, the JSON path, and then this is the request body that is again going as part of your parameterization file, right? So there is parameterization which is available as part of the functional test as well, right? So essentially, and then there are many other things. You might wonder, like, how do you deal with situations where you have where you would need a token and then you use that token to make a further API call. So for that, we have something called as prerequisite APIs, as you can see. So here there is a one prerequisite API, which basically runs every time you have used a prerequisite API. So this brings us to this aspect about what we call as dynamic variables, or things which we say are not available when you configure the API, but are only available dynamically or during runtime. So all such things are put under what we call as dynamic variables. And in this case, you can see there is a product ID which is going to take a JSON path, and that's coming from the prerequisite API. So this runs before any of these APIs which are dependent on this particular API or a prerequisite API actually are executed, right? And then you could declare other things, and we spoke about these environments. So we could create multiple environments. Each environment might have its own variables. So here in this case, we have created an endpoint which is a fixed value. So rather than defining this endpoint every single time, I can simply say hash endpoint hash, and then it's going to go pick up. And then so this endpoint might be different for your QA environment. It might be different for your dev environment. So you can create a set of your variables, or what we call as global variables, and then put them under respective environments. And then when you run, you can just select. So you build the test once, but you can run it against multiple environments, as you see. And then there are integrations with your, as I said, with other configuration, the defect management or bug tracking tools, or issue tracking tools like Jira and others. And then finally, there's one other aspect, which is we are not only dealing with API to API setups, but we also help people test API to database kind of situations where we run the API, we run a query, a database query, and then we map the JSON paths from an API to a particular value from your database, and then if they match, then we say it's passed. If not, we say it's failed. So and again, we'll try and cover that in a separate webinar, which we're going to set up shortly, right? So sort of to sum it up, it all started with building a simple functional API test, with no code and pretty comprehensive assertions, with all the utilities like JSON path extractors and schema generators and so on. Quickly run them. It's pretty fast. It runs on cloud. It scales, and then bring these APIs into an end-to-end chain of APIs, which then talk to each other. We could do a global assertions, across the entire flow, and then also look at individual APIs. And in case something fails, we know precisely which API failed, so that you could raise these bugs very specifically and then get them fixed very fast. And then we looked at doing taking the same functional APIs that we wrote, parameterize them, scale it up, and then run it with thousands of users, and then assess the performance of your APIs pretty early in the life cycle, and then ability to parameterize these APIs, with multiple data and run your data-driven tests, as part of as part of the solution. I mean, this was like a quick overview. There are many things like you could add certificates, you can download these reports, email them, post to Slack and Teams and so on, which I have ignored for this. Now, and we have basically checked off all the things, but there are many other things in Qyrus. So we have our own test data management solution. We have our synthetic data generation solutions, which will help you generate different kinds of data belonging to different domains very quickly. And then another differentiator as part of our data, data utilities is also what we call as data amplification, which is also called as example-based data generation. So if you show us a row of data in your database, then we could essentially create similar data, for you, hundreds of rows of similar data. And so which essentially means that the headache of anonymizing the data and cleaning it up before it's getting used and all is completely solved for you, right? So all this is something that we would like to cover as part of another webinar. So again, just to sum it up, we reduce the complexity by eliminating need for any complex workspace setup, understanding of writing JavaScript code and so on. So it's a simple, intuitive, codeless, user interface based based approach. Then we avoided silos because now you can test all your APIs along with your own system, integrate them, create an end-to-end process, and test it end-to-end. And then we also look at how we can scale this, to run across thousands of, generate load and do scale testing of your existing things, and all of this, on a simple cloud-based platform, which is extremely easy to use and is built on collaboration as the fundamental theme, because the APIs, other APIs that we spoke about, can also come from your other teams and probably other organizations in some cases, and then that's how we sort of holistically solve the three problems that we spoke about. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Rahul. Thank you.
Ameet, thank you very much. So a couple of things. What I'd like to do is we've got a place where you can post your questions, and I can see there's one question there that I can answer. It says, and Ameet, we can probably go back to the platform if we want to. It says, could you please cover the reporting capability and the ability to export them to other reporting systems? And we could potentially take this offline, or you could also answer the question.
Yeah, I'll just quickly cover it. So so let me switch over to the platform for one moment. So and again, this is something I think it was Gregory. So Gregory, what we do is, so as part of Qyrus, and again, this is what we call as global configuration of these multiple integrations that we see. So here are the ones that we support as of today. And then as part of this, you could always create a configuration. Like in this case, I would like to create, like X-Ray is one of the popular test management solutions on Jira. Then I could create and then attach my, so these are the different Jira products. So you do this global integration at one place for these various tools, and then use that as part of your as part of your test across different services that Qyrus has. But we can go deeper. But here, just to sort of let you know, here are some of the integrations that we support as part of Qyrus right now. And yeah. Okay.
All right, Ameet.
All right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please post your questions in the Q&A section. So one of the things that as you saw, that the API platform is truly comprehensive with a lot of features, and myself and Ameet will be happy to engage and show you additional things because there's a lot to be covered there. But as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we are going to conduct a series of webinars in the months to come. And the reason why we want to do that is because, we have built Qyrus to do everything for your digital journeys, which means that it's a comprehensive and integrated SaaS platform. And what I mean by that is, and Amit, you have to help me on here because you're controlling this, is what I mean by this is that we saw the API aspect of Qyrus, but what we also have as a part of the platform, which is an organically built solution, is your ability to test web, your ability to test mobile, and then we've also gone one step further to stitch all of this together to give you the ability to test your business processes. So what you saw in the API module to test processes has actually been extended for you to bring in your web tests, your mobile tests, and your API tests. And you can now do a comprehensive end-to-end testing. So not only are we catering this solution to QA functions, but we're also extending it left to developers, and we're also taking it right to business users. So when we talk about our solution being comprehensive and integrated, we actually mean it. And not only that, all of the capabilities that you see on the screen are built into the platform. Our ability to do low code, no code, which is extremely important in today's world, the conversations are going in those directions, gives you the agility and nimbleness and the speed. We've got AI capabilities for self-healing and predictive testing, which actually should be a webinar unto itself. Test data management, something that many of our clients bring other vendors and tools to do, is built into the platform. So is service virtualization. Reporting engine is pretty standard, and I call this more reactive. But what we're also doing in the platform is building a solution that gives you and makes you more proactive through insights and analytics. This is built into the platform. And then the last part of this, which is extremely important and perhaps cannot be claimed by any other solution in the marketplace, is an integrated browser and device farm. This makes our solution a complete comprehensive solution. So I'd like to leave you with this view, and please feel free to reach out to myself and Amit. Amit, if you can go to the next slide at any point. If you're engaged with any of our sales team members, please feel free to reach out and ask questions. And with that, I'll be open to taking questions from the attendees. All right, I've got one question, Amit. How quickly can you have these services up and running? Amit, I'll take this thing more, and you can
Sure.
you can sort of answer this technically. Is from our standpoint, our goal is to really make this as simple and easy for our prospects and our clients. And because it's a SaaS platform, at this time, our ability to spin things up for you is very quick, right? So, and I sometimes say this to my people is, if you tell us what you want on a Friday, we should have it up and running for you by Monday morning. There's a little bit of exaggeration in there, obviously, but I feel that our ability to get you up and running and set up is extremely quick. And that's really what one of our goals and our mission is.
Yeah, and if the question is regarding how quickly can you, if the question, if it was interpreted correctly, if not, if the question is about how quickly can you take an API and then convert it into a working test, we have seen that happening under 10 minutes. So the basic assertions that you can do using any API is under 10 minutes. And I would say it is limited by, sometimes we say it's how quickly can you type into our platform. And how much data is accessible to you right in front of you. So if you have something like Swagger or any other open API spec, it's much faster than that. But I think basic assertions on your API test can be done under 10 minutes, and you can run them continuously after that.
Okay. Any other questions?
So I think there is one more. Yeah. So there's another question that has come in. So what? CI platforms do we support? So right now we support Azure DevOps, we support Jenkins. Primarily I think we see most of our clients using one of these two. But in addition to that, as we said, like we have our CLI commands that pretty much makes us available on all the, or for that matter, any CI platforms that you might be using.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank everybody for attending the webinar, and please reach out to me or Ameet for any questions, and be on the lookout for future webinar series. So appreciate your time, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone.